Thanks for tuning in. Ham Talk Live will be on the air shortly. Please stand by. Thanks for tuning in. Ham Talk Live will be on the air shortly. Please stand by. This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by Tower Electronics. For connectors, cables, and more, call 920-435-2973 or visit pl-259.com. And by the Ham Station. Get your new radio or antenna by calling 800-729-4373 or go to hamstation.com.
It's Ham Radio with Neil Rapp. Here we go. Welcome to Ham Talk Live. Call in, let's talk. Neil's your guy. Ham Talk Live. Here we go on Ham Talk Radio.
Hey, good evening to everybody. This is Ham Talk Live, episode number 18. License Study with Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, recorded live on Thursday, June 16th, 2016. I'm your host, Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ham Talk Live. Tonight, Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, will take your calls about the no-nonsense study guide. The new edition for the extra class exam is now out, and we'll talk about the changes, and we'll take your calls live in just a few minutes. Last week on the show, Newsline's Karen Eve Murray, KD2GUT, was here to talk about her role as the writer of Amateur Radio Newsline and the Bill Pasternak Memorial episode that came out on Friday. So if you haven't listened to that, check out arnewsline.org. And if you missed the show, you can download it at any time at hamtalklive.com or on most of the podcast sites or YouTube. Also want to mention that today I updated the guest list. It's now online. We tried to pick some of the guests that you wanted to ask questions of, and so hopefully you will call in with some of those questions for our guests, so you can check that out over at hamtalklive.com. After the next break, be ready to call in with your questions. You can call us on Skype at the username hamtalklive or by telephone. The number is 812-NET-HAM1. That's 812-638-4261. You can also tweet us. You can send a question on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @HamTalkLive. So we'll come back and do a little interview. Then we'll take a break, and then we will take your calls live with Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, right after this word from the Ham Station, right here on Ham Talk Live. This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by the Ham Station. For 35 years, the Ham Station has brought new and used radios, antennas, accessories, and equipment to the amateur radio community. Give Jeff or Dan a call at 1-800-729-4373 or order online at hamstation.com. Hamstation carries all the major brands like ICOM, Yaesu, and Kenwood. Shop from a wide selection of radio scanners, MFJ accessories, Heil Sound products, Mirage and Ameritron amplifiers, Cushcraft antennas, and more. Easy online shopping and fast shipping are waiting for you at hamstation.com. Or call 1-800-729-4373. The Ham Station, proud to sponsor this episode of Ham Talk Live.
The grass may be greener on the other side, but at least we don't have to mow it. You're listening to Ham Talk Live with Neil Rapp.
Welcome back to Ham Talk Live. The Ham Station has you covered for both new and used equipment. Give Dan or Jeff a call at 800-729-4373 or go to hamstation.com. Be sure to listen to the show every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time right here on hamtalklive.com. Also, check out our Facebook page and Twitter feed. Just search for Ham Talk Live. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, is coming to you live from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dan is the author of several books, including the No Nonsense Amateur Radio License Study Guides, 21 Things to Do After You Get Your Amateur Radio License, and the CW Geek's Guide for Having Fun with Morse Code. Dan was first licensed in 1971, but didn't become very active until, in ham radio rather, until Field Day of 2002. Since then, he's been very active on the air and has one of the top ham radio blogs. That's over at KB6NU.com. Dan works a lot of CW and encourages others to use the mode. And at the Dayton Hamvention this year, he spoke about how to learn and have fun with CW at the CW Forum. Dan serves as the ARRL Michigan Section Training Manager, and 3 or 4 times a year he teaches a one-day technician class. For those classes, he uses his own no-nonsense study guide. The PDF version is available for free on his website, but it's also available in Kindle and Nook versions for a modest charge, and the print version is also available. That's on Amazon. Professionally, Dan is a freelance technical writer and a website developer. Dan, welcome this evening to Ham Talk Live.
Nice to be here, Neil.
So let's start off with the extra class, because the extra class question pool is going to change here in just about 2 weeks. On July the 1st, the new question pool takes effect, and thus your new book, the No Nonsense Guide to the Extra Class License Study Guide, includes all of those changes. And so what are some of the changes to the question pool this time around?
Well, I was really impressed with the new question pool, because what they've done is gotten rid of a lot of the old questions and reorganized some of the sections so that the relevant questions are grouped together more closely. I'll give you an example. In one of the sections, they had questions about klystrons and parametric amplifiers. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never used a klystron, and I would guess 99.9% of hams out there haven't. And I didn't even know what a parametric amplifier was. So they removed those questions. On the other hand, they added questions. In a later section, they added some questions on solar array charge controllers. And, that's gotten to be a big thing, is powering your station by using solar panels. So they've added a lot of more relevant questions and gotten rid of some of the old ones. And that's the major change.
Yeah, I think over the years they're doing a little bit better job of that. I remember one of the things that we used to always complain about on the technician exam was the question about Guam. I don't know if you remember that one, but what ITU region is Guam in? That was one of the questions. And we're like, okay, now wait a minute. The intent of the question here is so that people realize Guam is in a different ITU region, therefore there are different band allocations. But instead of making the question ask that, the question was, what ITU region is Guam in? And so that was one of the things that I was adamant about, and some others were as well. I wasn't the first that said, hey, we need to revamp these questions around, and we've got maybe the right material, but we're not asking them in the right way. And I think over the years that's gotten a lot better.
Yeah, I do too. And that Guam question hasn't been on the last couple of question pools anyway. So
yeah, it's been changed around so that it does ask the intent rather than
right.
Just is it 1, 2, or 3? Which region is it? So
I think it's 3, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe it is. I believe it is 3 actually. But always, that one always threw me. And I don't know, but I think they're doing a better job. So if you're taking an extra class test and you've been using the current study materials, we want to make sure everybody knows you've got until the end of the month.
Correct.
And after that, starting on July 1st, the new question pool takes effect. Now, just because that happens doesn't necessarily mean that you're out of luck. It's just the way the questions are worded, right?
Right. And I think about between 15 and 20% of the questions are different. So, if theoretically, if you knew all the answers to all the questions, you'd still pass the test. But, there's quite a few questions that are different.
So if you want to practice those particular questions, make sure you pay attention to the dates on your study guides or on your manuals, and make sure
And
that
taking
that's for the right one. And the practice
and taking
test.
the practice tests online. Yeah.
Yes, and there's many different sites for that. We may even talk about that a little bit if we want. But those practice tests, there are different versions because that's going to change on July 1st. So make sure you're using the right ones. Well,
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about your study guide that's just coming out for the extra and how that's different from some of the others that are available.
Well, I call it the no nonsense study guide because it really is kind of no nonsense. I don't really, and I get criticized for this, I don't really try to teach the material, but I try to teach people how to pass the test. And especially for the technician class test, I do that because I think that people need to get a license to. A lot of people learn by doing, and how can they do without a license? So they really want to get that license, and that's what my study guide's about. Just to cut to the chase. I had one guy email me after he passed his test, and he said, Dan, he said, your study guide said in one paragraph, he was talking about a particular topic, said in one paragraph what it took the ARRL study guide 1 or 2 pages to do. So that kind of gives you a feel for how my study guides are written.
Now, I was looking at a sample on the Kindle app, and we were talking about this before the show. The way I would kind of describe your study guide is that it's a narrative, it's a story where you're starting out with this topic, and then you write a story, and then in bold you've got the questions, the information that's in the question itself. So it reads like a story. It's not so much a manual, but a true study guide. It's a thing that you read and you notice the bold print things. And so it really does cut down to the chase, where you may still need some explanations on some of these things, but this is the study guide version.
Exactly. And it's kind of an interesting story how I started doing these things. I guess maybe 10 years ago now, we were at Field Day. Field Day's coming up. We're at Field Day. I'm at the public information table, and a guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, I've written this study guide, and I'm trying to get more people to use it." And he'd read my blog, I guess, and so I looked at it, and it was written in that same style. And I said, "Well, I'll put it on my blog," And I put it on my blog. 2 years later, the question pool was updated, and it was pretty popular on the blog. Two years later, the question pool was updated, and I tried to find this guy. I tried to find him and ask him if he was going to update it, and I couldn't even find him. I looked him up on QRZ.com. He had no email address listed. I sent him a postal mail. Never got a response. I said, "Well, this thing's too good to just let go." So I updated that version, and then I added the general and extra class versions. So that's how I kind of got into it. So I can't even really take credit for the style per se, although a lot of that content is mine.
Yeah.
The storytelling part.
Sure. One of the things we were talking about, again, before the show Maybe we ought to record before and after these shows. It seems like we always have good discussions before and after the shows that people would benefit from. But one of the things that I was talking to you about, being an educator professionally, is learning styles, and that different people learn in different ways. There's auditory learners and visual learners and tactile learners and all these different types of learning. And most people, for some reason, once again, I'm the exception to this, but most people favor one heavily. And so where some people may do better with one of the traditional study manuals, we'll call it, they really need this reading, this narrative style to help them get it. And like you said, it cuts to the chase. So, it's a different approach to the same thing. And we're ending up at the same point.
And because, like, think about this. I have an electrical engineering degree. It took me 4 years to learn this material from a engineering/scientific viewpoint. Well, we're not going to do that in ham radio, right? Nobody's going to take that much time. So it's, like I say, I get criticized sometimes for the lack of technical depth, but this is a hobby. That's still kind of the way it is.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we don't have a chance to, teach more and build more in at the beginning. Your philosophy here, and a lot of people, is that you get the license and then you start learning it, and it takes time. It does. It takes a lot of time to do that, and there's just too much to cram in all at once. And
right.
So I think that's a good approach for a lot of people is to do it that way.
And I consider every one of my students, and even almost every one of my readers, as my El Maries. And they're free to contact me, call me, email me if they've got questions about anything. And a lot do. A lot of them do. And I help them as much as I can. And, if they're not here in Ann Arbor, it's kind of harder. But even so, I get lots of emails on different topics, and I try to answer them. And that's how I work around the lack of actually teaching the material, if you will.
Yeah, the depth.
Yeah, the depth.
The depth. Yeah, very good. And there are other sources for the depth. You could use this with one of the other manuals, or I know reading on your blog, you often just recommend Google.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff on Google. It's amazing how much is on Google, really.
Yeah,
there's
just so much. Yeah, there's just so much stuff out there, and thank goodness for Google for pointing us in where to go on the net to get it.
Yeah.
So remind everybody how they can get a copy of this.
Okay, just go to my website, KB6NU.com. There's a link right on the homepage to the study guides page. And like you said, the PDF version of the technician class study guide is free. There's a charge for the Kindle and Nook versions. And then there's a link to Amazon for the print version. And that's for all three study guides.
Okay, so be sure to check that out. That's KB6NU.com. And then you can look on Amazon or on Nook for the print and the ebook version of the study guide. The other thing that I want to talk about before we take a break and take everybody's questions here, hopefully we've got some questions lined up for you. If not, I do. But how do you cram everything for a technician class into a single day? I've done a lot of classes. I teach for a living, and I teach ham radio as well. And I've done the traditional 10 to 13 week classes. I've done 4 weeks. I've done a variety of things. But one time, 3 of us kind of pitched in and did a weekend class. We did it in 2 days, and we liked never finished. I mean, the last couple of sub-elements, it was like, okay, and now okay, now it's time to take your test. And so how do you cram all that into one day?
Well, so there's several sort of tricks of the trade. First off, I'm require everybody to pre-register. Not that I really kind of need them to pre-register, but it gives me their email addresses so I can email them information about the class. And one of the most important things I tell them is to download the study guide immediately, however long before the class is going to take place, and just start reading through it and maybe take some online practice tests. That gets them prepared for the class. Then once we get into the class, one of the first things I'd say in the class is, I'm not really trying to teach you the material here. I'm trying to teach you enough to pass the test. And I tell them, I said, I'm gonna go through all this material pretty quickly. I will take some questions, but I don't get distracted. At some point, if the answer gets too long, I just cut it and move on, because we do have to get through all the questions in the question pool before the VEs come in. So armed with those two, and I start and stop on time. I start right on time in the morning. We take a half an hour for lunch. I don't wait. If people aren't back from lunch, I have to start, because there's all that material to get through. The other thing I do, and I think this is kind of an important thing, I follow my study guide from front to back, okay, and just in that exact order. And the way my study guide is organized is all the technical material comes first. So the first thing I cover is the Ohm's law, how to calculate power. Then we get into the circuit diagrams and talk about the components. So we cover all that technical material early in the morning when they're still kind of fresh. And then we go through the rules and regulations and operating practices later in the afternoon, where it doesn't really matter. You don't have to think so much about that stuff, but just sort of memorize the answers. And that's the other thing about the tech test. A lot of those questions you can only learn by memorizing, right? I mean, there's no way to memorize that 52.5, or well, I guess you can't calculate that. But there are a lot of questions, especially the rules. There's no way you can.
Yeah, what is the function of a control operator? That's
right. How much power can you run when operating a radio control model? I mean, those are all just memorization, So anyway, I think that's a key point too, is the order in which I cover the topics.
Very good. Any other big suggestions to people who are teaching one of these one day or weekend classes as opposed to the long drawn out?
Yeah. One thing I do is and of course now I've done this a number of times already, so I'm pretty practiced at it. But go along with what you said about my study guide, I tell stories. I tell stories as we go through. That keeps people's interest, and it brings home the point. I'll give you an example. There's several questions on the test about using Ferrite chokes if you have a noise problem. And I always tell the story of the first 40-meter dipole I put up at my house here. I stretched out the dipole. I got my antenna analyzer out. I tuned it up. Everything looked great. I go down to the shack and start calling CQ. The next thing I know, my wife's running down the stairs. "What are you doing?" she says. I said, "Well, I'm just here calling CQ." She says, "Well, you're opening and closing the garage door." And it's true. So that, and the way it worked was that the dipole was run almost parallel to the wire from the switch on the wall to the garage door opener. And of course, those garage door openers did not have any noise suppression on their input, and it was just picking up that RF and opening and closing. So what did I do? I got a Ferrite choke, wound a few turns around it, worked like a charm. I haven't had trouble since. So telling that story brings home that point about the Ferrite choke.
That reminds me of a story. I had found this thing that I just thought was just incredible. It was a wireless microphone. So you'd plug in the little receiver into the mic jack, and then you had this little almost walkie-talkie like microphone with this telescopic antenna on it, and it used 49 megahertz, I think it was. And so I loved that thing because I could turn the radio up in my parents' bedroom, which is where the radios were, and I could go into my room and I could still hear it, and I could be, walk into my room and grab something and then come back, without having to drop it. This is before we had $30 handhelds. Right. And one day I noticed that I made a phone call and on my cordless phone, and every time I hung up, I heard "bun-up." I'm like, wait a minute, that's the courtesy tone on the repeater, and so I got a dial tone, and then I hit it again and turned the phone off, and I hear "bun-up." And yep, sure enough, my cordless phone was on the same frequency as the wireless microphone. And so, yeah, thankfully, whoever I called that day did not answer. So, yeah, those things happen. And that does make, it makes it interesting. So that way, you can use that to teach something like interference or, a lot of people don't realize just how much stuff is up there at 2.4 gigahertz and why your Wi-Fi doesn't work well. Yeah, there's a bazillion things up there. So, stories are always good.
Yeah. So the other suggestion I'd make, and everybody's different, and I've gotten a little pushback on this. I don't use PowerPoint slides at all. It's all me talking to them and telling them stories. I think PowerPoints generally put people to sleep, especially if you're talking about 6 hours of it, right? And so I just don't use them. I walk around, I draw things on the board. All that activity gets them to follow me and not fall asleep.
Yeah, so there's a balance there, definitely. I use PowerPoint a lot, but you can get PowerPointed to death. Right. So I go the total, totally off it, but everybody's got a little different way to do it. But I just say be careful of that, Sure. Well, it's time to take our break. But after the break, we will take your calls. So if you have a question about the new extra class pool or the study guides or teaching one of these classes or finding one of these classes, whatever, for Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, give us a call. It's 812-NET-HAM1 is the phone number. That brings you in on Skype, or you can just Skype directly at Ham Talk Live. So we'll be back with your calls right after this message from Tower Electronics.
This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by Tower Electronics. Tower Electronics has been the Ham's dime store since 1978, bringing connectors, antennas, cables, and other parts to the world. Scott and Jill travel the country bringing their store to you at Hamfest, but you can also order online at pl-259.com or by calling 920-435-2973. Stock up on those supplies like PL259 and N connectors, audio cables, mobile antennas, and ham sticks. Their silver-plated N connectors are even in use on the International Space Station. Tower Electronics is a dealer for MFJ, Comet, Daiwa, OPEC, Workman, and Ham Pro Technologies. Tower Electronics online at pl-259.com, proud to sponsor this episode of Ham Talk Live.
Ham Talk Live with Neil Rapp. Hey baby, I'd love to be in your grid square.
Join the conversation. Call us on voice with Skype at Ham Talk Live or give us a call at 812-NET-HAM1. That's 812-638-4261. Now, here's more Ham Talk Live.
We'd like to thank Scott and Jill at Tower Electronics for sponsoring the show once again tonight so we can bring you Ham Talk Live. They will be at the Monroe, Michigan Hamfest on Sunday, and then next they have Oak Creek, Wisconsin on July 9th. If you can't make it to one of those, give them a call at 920-435-2973 or you can visit them online at pl-259.com. Be sure to listen every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time right here on hamtalklive.com. And if you miss the show, you can download the podcast from the website and most popular podcasting websites. So it is time for your calls. So now's the time. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, give us a call on Skype at Ham Talk Live, or if Skype isn't your thing, you can call us by telephone. The number is 812-NET-HAM-1, 812-NET-HAM-1, and we will take your questions and see if we can answer those for you. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, is our guest, the author of the No Nonsense Study Guides. So we will stand by here and see if we get any phone calls for you. While we're waiting here, let's talk a little bit about the CW. I know that's one of your big things, and you had a presentation at Dayton this year on CW. So tell us a little bit about the CW, and if you want to call in, just go right ahead and call in. We'll take your call. Oh, I'm sorry, Dan. I forgot to hit your button here. So
that's right.
So they didn't hear that. So go ahead.
Okay. For old timers like me, I got my license in 1971. We had to pass a code test, so we knew all about code. But since there's been no code test requirement, CW has gotten to be kind of a little bit of a mystique about it. And so I just wanted to try and break down that mystique, show that it's not rocket science, and it's a lot of fun. So that was the whole thrust of my talk at Dayton. And of course, I have another book, The CW Geek's Guide to Having Fun with Morse Code, where I went through basically the same material. It talks a little bit about how to learn the code, and then a little bit about how to operate, and basically how to have fun with it.
Very good. Why CW? What's your what fascinates you more about that than some of the other modes?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think that it's it's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's kind of a flow thing. It's certainly a skill. I take certain pride in developing my skill at sending and receiving. I sometimes joke that anybody can talk, but it takes some skill to send and receive Morse code. So that's not quite the case. Of course, phone operation is a skill too, but I think that's it more than anything is the skill involved.
Okay, very good. Well, yeah, I remember taking my test when I was 5, and you had to copy a whole minute of a solid copy. And first time I got 23 letters and needed 25. And didn't make it, but the second time I got 104, so made it and finally got up to 20 words a minute. I put it off for a long time. I got up to advanced by the time I was 9. Mm-hmm. But the 20 words a minute, I was like, yeah, the theory, yeah, I can do that. But the code, no, there's no way. And when I was 18, I finally said, okay, I need to be a VE now that we've got this VE stuff going on, and I need to pass this. So I finally got the 20 words a minute down. It took a few times, but finally got it right before they dropped all the code tests. So it's a lot of fun, and I still teach it. I still remember it, and I still teach it because some people want to do that just so they have a secret code.
Right. And I encourage people to try it, and if it's not your thing, fine. Don't do it. Don't let anybody browbeat you into thinking that you got to know code to be a real ham, because that's the farthest thing in my mind. But I think everybody should try it just because I have a lot of fun with it, and you won't know unless you try it.
Very, very good, very good. And it hasn't gone away. There's still a lot of people using CW, so give it a shot. And there's all kinds of resources out there to to help you do that as well. 812-NET-HAM1 is the phone number, 812-NET-HAM1, if you want to ask a question to KB6NU about his license study guides or the new extra class pool that's out, or the blog. You know, we haven't even mentioned the blog. Talk a little bit about the blog.
Sure. So I sometimes joke that I have the #1 rated ham radio blog. The reason I say that is most often if you Google ham radio blog or amateur radio blog, I come up #1. and the reason for that is, I think, not so much that it's the best thing out there, because there's lots of great blogs, but I've been at it a long time. I've been doing it over 12 years now, and there's over 2,500 posts, and Google rates that highly, longevity and amount of content. But there is a lot of good content on there, I think, and a lot of people like to read it. So,
very good. I think we've got, it came through. We have our first call of the night, a familiar one, K0MD. How are you this evening?
Good evening. Nice to hear you on. I enjoy your show, as always, and I've enjoyed hearing Dan's story tonight and reading his blog. Dan, what's your secret for keeping your blog so well read? I mean, sometimes you tackle some controversial issues. Do you ever get criticized or get a lot of heat from that, especially when you criticize the ARRL? And what's your experience been with that?
Oh, Scott just opened up a big can of worms there. All right, go ahead, Dan. It's all yours.
Well, you know what?
This is a call-in show, right? We have to have some controversy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'm not afraid of tackling controversy, and it would be one thing if I just criticize the ARRL, but I'm as you probably know since you read my blog, I'm a big ARRL supporter. So all my criticism is aimed at making the ARRL better and making ham radio better, not just the ARRL. So yes, I take on some controversial topics, but I walk the walk too. I just don't talk the talk. I ran for the board of directors twice. And so I was ready to serve, and it didn't work out. I didn't get elected, and that's another story. But I'll take on controversial topics. And the other part of it is maybe I spend too much time doing this. I'm on like every ham radio mailing list you can think of. So I get all the new, and I'm on Twitter. I get news via Twitter about ham radio, and so I'm kind of tuned in to what's happening in ham radio, and I conversely I turn around and put it on my blog for other people to read. So I think that's how I keep that fresh as well. That makes sense.
And I recall, I think that your criticism of the league was simply focused on the fact that they were not growing membership as aggressively as you thought they should. And the CEO at Dayton made a point of saying the league has to increase membership by 200,000 or it will fold financially in the long run because of the age of the ham population. So you were just probably a few years too early, but you were right on.
Well, right. Yeah, and I was going to mention that because you're right. That was one of my latest, I won't say criticisms, my latest things about the ARRL. And I was at that meeting too. I was at that forum, and I just haven't gotten around to writing about it yet. But you're right on. That new president, he's got that in his mind. I don't know that he set a goal like I would like to have them set. My thinking was that they should set a goal of 25% of licensed radio amateurs as the membership goal for the ARRL. But you're absolutely right. He's hot on increasing membership, and I think that's great.
I want to ask you a question about CW if Neil will give me a little more time tonight.
Yep.
I have a work colleague who's an extra class ham, but really a 5-word per minute ham. And I'm a sort of a higher speed CW contester. I like to do 35, 38 words a minute. During contests. So I find it hard to converse with CW at the slower speeds now because of the setup that I have and just the fact that once you get used to doing it at higher words per minute, it's a challenge. Are there any nets or any times of events on the air where someone who wants to increase their speed from, say, 5 or 10 up to 20, are there regular groups of hams getting on to help one another? And what would you tell this colleague of mine that he should do to increase his code speed? What's other than get on the air? But it's hard. He said it's hard to find people, and he actually says we hams are a bit rude to him. They won't stay and talk to him because he's so slow. And I wasn't surprised to hear that, but I was disappointed. And that'll be my last question, Neil. Thanks for taking the call.
Oh, thanks for calling in, Scott. Go ahead, Dan.
I'm kind of disappointed to hear he's gotten that reaction too. But, there is a little portion of the 40-meter bands from 7100 to 7125 where a lot of slower speed operators hang out. He might try that. The other thing I would suggest is have him look into the CW Ops, CW Academy, and he can go to cwops.org for that. The CW Ops is a group that, in a way, they're kind of a little bit of elitist. You have to be able to operate at 25 words a minute or more and get 5 of the current members to support your membership. But the one thing they do right, and totally right, is the CW Ops Academy, and it's totally designed to take slower speed operators and turn them into higher speed operators. The goal is to get them to that 20 word per minute plateau. So you might want to look into that.
Well, thanks very much. And Neil, I'm excited about your program going forward. You've got some great people lined up after Dan, so congratulations on the success of your call-in show, and thanks for taking my call tonight.
Yeah, we added several of your suggestions to the list today, so we'll look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for the support and calling in. I appreciate that. All right. Well, that's going to finish things up pretty much for us tonight. We're just about out of time, Dan, but we've got about a minute here, so if you've got any other tips that you've thought of or anything that you want to throw in, why, go ahead, and if not, we'll just wrap things up.
Well, I'd just say one last thing. So getting back to the classes, I would like to encourage everyone, all the clubs out there to teach some tech classes. You don't have to do the one day if that's not your thing. You can do the more traditional ones. But I think it's important to have classes because, hams are not getting any younger, and people transfer from town to town. And I think the only way the clubs are going to stay in business is if they teach classes. And so I would encourage that. And if anyone has any questions about that, I would love to take your emails or even your phone calls. You can email me at cwgeek@kb6nu.com, and I'll do what I can to help you get a class set up in your club.
Very good. Again, that's cwgeek, Geek, at kb6nu.com to contact Dan. Well, thank you, Dan, for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Good luck with the books, and good luck with your class coming up this weekend.
Well, thanks, Neil. It was a real pleasure. I hope I've gotten a few neurons firing out there.
All right. Very good. Thank you so much. Quick shout out to the Xenia Wireless Association. One of the guys from the Xenia, Illinois, Wireless Association came by the program that we had at Dayton. They're a 501c3 nonprofit that's raising money for repeaters and emergency assistance and communications. So a shout out to them. And also jtron.com. They have a lot of parts and kits and that kind of thing. And they wanted me to mention that they have a monthly soldering iron contest. So if you want to win one of those, go over to j-tron.com. Well, that's a wrap for this week's edition of Ham Talk Live. I'd like to thank my guest, Dan Romanchik, KB6NU, and all the callers and listeners out there in cyberspace, and invite you back next Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time when Sean Kutzko, KX9X, the Public Relations Manager and former contest manager at ARRL, will be here to talk about Field Day. So for a list of all of our upcoming guests, visit hamtalklive.com. So for now, this is Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, saying 7-3, 888-888-75, and may the good DX be yours.